You're listening to His Empire of Dirt, Chapter 11. Henry Emily was lied to. "Mikey," Charlotte said, as they played with a basketball outside of Uncle Henry's house, "are you doing okay?" Charlie was perhaps the only person to check in on Mike during the entire ordeal. Mom had, finally, into total disarray, monotonously cleaning the house as if she was one of Dad's animatronics. She cooked automatically, only eating because her husband coaxed her into it. The record player spun at night, like Dad was trying to spur her into life, but she just sat there, staring. Mike will realize much later that he has perhaps broken his mother worse than his father ever could. Liz, too, had distanced herself from Mike. He lost his only ally in the house because of his transgressions, and really, he deserved it. At school, fellow students shied away from him, and under their breaths they spoke of Freddy's and the bite, and how Michael Afton is such a murderer. They feel so awfully for the Afton family. Charlotte, though, seemed to understand. She was just about his last friend and ally in the world. She never brought up the bite, and she never talked about Evan. She let Mike sit on the porch and hang his head on her shoulder, sobbing, missing his little brother that he had no right to miss. Mike shrugged his shoulders. It had been a few days since the ordeal, and Father's wrath knew no ends. Sometimes Mike thought his old man spent his days in the workshop entirely concocting new forms of psychological torment that even the FBI would consider perverse. "You know," Mike muttered, his head trained at his feet as he threw the basketball back to Charlie. Then his eyes lit up as Uncle Henry's car pulled into the driveway. Charlotte happily bounced from her heels to her toes and rushed up to her father, jumping into his embrace. Mike's entire being burned with jealousy as Uncle Henry kissed all over Charlie's head, exclaiming praises to her and holding her tight like she would slip away from him. Sometimes Mike hated Uncle Henry, because Mike cannot do anything but hate sometimes. He hated Uncle Henry for making Dad smile, for loving his daughter so much, for being the golden standard of Hurricane. Most of all, though, Mike hated Uncle Henry for not being his own father, for not loving him like he should. "Mike!" Uncle Henry exclaimed, setting Charlie down on the sidewalk and approaching his nephew. Mike managed to smile in a shaky wave. In turn, Uncle Henry reached into his pocket and withdrew a tiny box. "I got this for you, son." Really? Really. Uncle Henry squatted down to Mike's height and smiled warmly like Dad never could. Dad was perhaps hardwired to be cold. Even his hands were frozen. Sometimes Mike thought his father a walking corpse, doomed to never rest. How correct he would soon learn he was. Mike tentatively opened the box. Within was a set of expensive colored pencils. You really got these for me?" Mike quietly asked, and his eyes began to well with tears. Uncle Henry gently smiled and placed his hands on Mike's shoulders. "Michael, listen," he said, still smiling even when Mike was about to cry. "I'm sorry that I haven't been here as much as I should have been for you. I cannot imagine what you're going through. It wasn't your fault, okay? You did something bad, but that didn't make Fred's head chomp down like that. If anything, I should have looked at him the night before, made sure his circuits were all in order. It's not your fault, okay?" "Dad doesn't say that," Mike admitted before he could stop himself. His cheeks flushed with red as he dodged Uncle Henry's gaze. Uncle Henry's face surrendered to confusion. "What do you mean by that, Michael?" It's okay. You can tell me anything. It will be a secret between us if you wish." "It's nothing. Uncle Henry, really. Michael, it's okay. It's nothing! Mike yelled, and when he bent over to pick up his colored pencils, his sleeves fell down to his elbows. Uncle Henry meagerly reached towards Mike's wrists and flipped his arm over, revealing several bruises that had blossomed on the area. Uncle Henry! Did Will do this to you, Michael? Uncle Henry softly asked. So soft it was as if he had never spoken. Is your dad hurting you? No, it's okay, Uncle Henry. Mike shakily smiled through the phantom pains, clutching his pencils to his chest like they were his life force. I deserve it. At that, Uncle Henry's heart and smile shattered, and he embraced Mike so tightly that he nearly cut off his circulation. Don't you ever believe that, son, Henry ordered, shaking his head as he began to shed tears. Don't you ever believe that you deserve this pain. Mike, please don't ever think that. Uncle Henry wiped his face free of tears when he looked back to Michael. I can't lose another son, all right? I can't lose you too, Mike. Not to bad thoughts like those. Mike didn't really understand what his doting uncle meant by the phrase, but he nodded regardless. He didn't want to let anyone else down. Mike stayed with the Emilys for the next few days. When his father's violet Thunderbird skidded into the driveway, his heart thudded out of his chest, and Uncle Henry ordered him and Charlotte to lock themselves in her room. Their curiosity got the better of them, though, and they left the door slightly ajar. Dad walked into the house after Henry opened the door for him, but did not invite him in. It looked like he had been drinking, the way he stumbled a bit and his tie was loose, but other than that, he was the picture of perfection. Every step he took into the Emily household, his control over this dominion that was not his, expanded, and soon Mike was just another peasant in his father's ever-growing kingdom. Will, Henry said, folding his arms across his chest, I'd like to speak with you outside. Oh, where's my son, old friend? Dad said instead, smiling like the wonderful actor he was. I really am worried sick about him. We made a promise to each other to never lie, Henry said, a warning at the edge of his voice. Don't you start now, friend. Love, Dad said, and he neared Henry, so close to the both of them that they could touch. I'd never lie to you. Love, Mike thought, examining the situation from above. What does he mean by that? Uncle Henry and Dad were best friends. Did best friends call each other love? Mike wasn't sure. Him and Charlie never called each other that. Dad called Mom that. And that was all. Love? Mike didn't know his dad was capable of love. Then, tell me now, why does Mike have bruises, Will? Why does he think he deserves them? What the hell are you doing to that boy? Dad's smile never wavered. If anything, it only grew into what it wanted to be. Dark, sinister, cunning. N, he said gently. I'm sure I have no idea what you're talking about. Don't you bullshit me, Uncle Henry snapped, and everyone listening to him startled at his use of crass language. Don't you do this. Henry. Dad's shoulders finally sagged, his gaze cast downwards. I know I've been vile to him, but whenever I look at him, I just see the blood. I just see Evan. He killed my son, love. He took Evan from me. He broke my things. I know he did, Henry said, and he moved forward a bit, placing a hand on Dad's shoulder. But that doesn't mean you get to hurt him. That doesn't mean he should suffer with the rest of us. Dad's expression looked like he wanted to counter. And why not? But instead, Dad sagely nodded, letting Henry's words absorb into him. Of course, old friend. You're right. As always. You keep checking my behavior, yeah? You ensure I don't fall. I'm sorry, Ann. It's just been so difficult. With Lizzie. With my wife's practically catatonic behavior. I understand. But you must be better. All right? Nothing like your old man. Do not speak of him! Dad snapped, his composure falling for but a moment. It was as if the devil himself had possessed him. Or, more likely, Dad had been the devil the entire time, and issued the threat. Henry startled, and immediately Dad's features softened. Apologies. You know I don't like to speak of him. I know, Will. Henry's eyes softened once more, and he pulled Dad into a hug. You're going to be okay, dear. I won't let you fall like this. I think, though, Mike should stay with me for a few days. Just until you clear your head. Clear my head. From over Uncle Henry's shoulder, still caught in his embrace, Dad's eyes danced upward to Charlie's room. Mike clamped a hand over his mouth, expecting his father to be glaring at him with fury wrought precisely from the depths of hell. But he hadn't been. Instead, Dad's eyes were trained on Charlie, and it looked like a wonderful, terrible idea was springing into his dark mind. A few days later, Charlotte got invited to Susie's birthday party. With that, Mike's time with the Emilys seemed to expire. As he headed out the door, his father in the driveway, ready to pick up his eldest and only living son, Mike clutched onto his pencils like the Holy Bible, and he smiled big to Charlie, and he walked out the door. Mike's breath wavered when he entered the car. His dad was smiling entirely unlike himself, his teeth giving way to fondness instead of a fierce, unnatural hunger. "Hello, Michael," Dad said, and it was almost kind, almost fatherly. Almost. "Hi, Dad." Dad eyed the Emily household as they drove down the street. "You don't seem happy to see me, boy." Sorry. Mike's eyes were trained on his pencils, and if he could picture the rainbow he will draw with them, he could imagine that these colors were all that existed, instead of his father's void of gray that will forever conquer Mike's life. "That's all right. I did as Henry said, Michael, and I cleared my head. You and I, my son, are the only ones we can depend on at the end of the day. We must protect Mom and Liz, and if we love them, we must get rid of people who want to hurt us, who want to see us break. That is why I've been cross with you. You broke something of mine. I'm sorry. Don't apologize." Dad's smile fell as he gripped his hands around the steering wheel, his knuckles paling. Then he smiled once more, turning to his son and patting him on the shoulder. Mike tried not to flinch, and he failed. "Do you want to know how you can make it up to me?" Mike's eyes lit up, and he eagerly nodded. "First, you listen. Do you know what the problem with Henry is, Michael? He completely and utterly fails to understand the greater good. He acts like he's never lost something in his life. He thinks he knows so much, but really, he's entirely ignorant. He forgets that I understand the greater good, I understand how to make us immortal. He thinks heaven will do so for him. Dad scoffed. He believes in God, when he should just be believing in me. Understand? I don't think so, Dad. Dad sighed through his smile. That's all right. I didn't think you would. So, here's how you can make it up to me, Michael. Trust me, and do as I say. That's all? Dad gently nodded. That is all. Mike didn't know big words like redemption, but the thing that his father was offering felt very much the same. Mike smiled, and he nodded, and he promised to trust his father and do as he said. It was his last chance at life, after all. It was pouring outside. Mike watched raindrops cascade down the window, pretending they were racing. Dad had parked outside of the diner, lights within blaring for Susie's birthday. He killed the lights of the car, and he leaned over to Mike. I will be right back, he said, patting Mike on the shoulder. Okay, Dad. Dad nodded, and he exited the car. Mike watched his father saunter up to the diner, to his kingdom, and he approached the fire exit. There was the outline of a small body, giddily bouncing up and down when Dad met them. Dad took the figure's hand and led them around the corner. And then Dad withdrew something glistening and grey from his waistband, and soon all that existed in the night were streaks of scarlet, and Mike thought he had heard his father laughing. A few moments later, Dad entered the car again, staring a bit into the night before the car peeled away. His smile was so broad, a kid in a candy store, and his face and hands were dotted with red. Dad? Mike stammered, his father speeding far faster than he usually did. Are you? Michael, Dad said, and he couldn't stop smiling. He couldn't stop laughing. This is the part where you have to trust me. Okay. I just wanted to make sure you were okay. Oh, Michael, Dad said, and his laughter was louder than anything Mike had ever heard. I am absolutely brilliant. Mike and his dad both equally detested hospitals. The only comfort Mike had in the whitewashed edifice was his father, and, oh, it was so wonderful for his father to be his source of ease. Dad smiled upon him affectionately, like a father should. They'd gone home first, and Dad washed himself free of blood, and then the landline began ringing. Uncle Henry had been distraught, but Dad hadn't elaborated on what was the cause. Thus, Mike and his father barreled to the hospital. Michael, Dad said slowly, kneeling down to Mike's level, this is where you do as I say, yeah? Mike eagerly nodded. Okay. Dad beamed. When your Uncle Henry asks you where we were tonight, you say that both of us spent all day together at home. Tell me, Mike, where were we tonight? You and me were at home. All night. We didn't go to the diner. You didn't have something sharp. You didn't laugh as you were covered in blood. You're my dad, and I'm getting your trust back. Good lad. Now, Uncle Henry is gonna be very, very sad. So we have to be brave for him, yeah? Mike was very good at pretending to be brave. Thus, he puffed out his chest, saluted his father, and walked down the hallway with him. Uncle Henry was sobbing at the door they met him at. His eyes were puffy and flushed, his glasses on the floor. In the bed behind him, there was a figure covered by a bloody sheet. Dad? Mike said, tugging at his father's sleeves. Where's Shush, Mike, Dad whispered, and he weakly gestured to the bed. She's gone now. Gone? The body under the sheet would never stir again. And with the ominous reveal, Mike now knew that he would never have an ally ever again. Mike was alone. No, I have Dad now. Dad's proud of me now. William, Uncle Henry stammered, and he fell onto Dad's figure, snivelling and sobbing and barely supporting himself. Dad frowned and rubbed circles on Henry's back, shushing him and coaxing him into peace. I don't know what to do without her. What do I do? Shoshan, Dad said, and Mike could barely hear what Dad said next when he leaned into Henry's ear. But he thought he heard, I'll put you back together again. Later, in the waiting room, Uncle Henry's tears had mildly subsided. He searched around him, as if scared someone would walk in on them. And then, Michael, he said, taking a knee, placing a hand on Mike's shoulder. I need you to be very honest with me. Yeah, Uncle Henry? Mike thought he could pass out. He'd never been a very good liar. Where were you and your father tonight? Mike slowly exhaled and looked up at his uncle with big, teary eyes. We were home together all night. We watched Immortal and the Restless together. There was... Mike gulped, his head spinning. There was a rerun. Something within Uncle Henry simultaneously snapped and fixed, all at once. Thank you, son. Thank you. Thank you. This was when Henry Emily broke, and Mike would only know years and years later that he had driven the final nail into the coffin. Mike, Dad said, and his smile wavered between being fatherly and maniacal, and he took a knee and embraced Mike in an alien hug. I am so proud of you. I love you so much, son. That was the only time his father had ever told him he was proud of his son, and that he loved him equal measure. Mike could only stare behind his father's shoulder, though, at Charlotte's limp body. Mike knew he wasn't very smart, and he wasn't very wise, but he could just vaguely put two and two together because blood plus Dad laughing equals Dad killed Charlie. Dad, Mike stammered, and he thought he couldn't breathe. He was drowning. Why did you... Quiet, Michael, Dad hissed in his ear, and Mike could feel Dad's smile stretch across his face. You're going to have to trust me. I love you, Mike. I did this to protect us. Dad pulled away and wiped one of Mike's stray tears. We're going to build an empire together, son. An empire of what? Mike wasn't sure, and he didn't want to know. He didn't want to be a king or a god like Dad. He just wanted Evan and Charlie back. But at the same time, Dad finally loved him. Dad was finally proud of him. That was all Mike had ever chased after. Let's go home, yeah? Dad patted him on the back and led him down the hall. But Charlie's image was still in the front of Mike's eyes, and Uncle Henry's crestfallen figure was forever burned into the back of his mind. And from that day on, Mike was drowning along with his uncle that he had unwittingly pushed under the waves.